just heard, faced with the upcoming presidential elections in the US, which will take place in November of this year, NATO is attempting to Trump-proof its aid for Ukraine.
Recently, the alliance floated an idea for a €100 billion multi-year aid package to be agreed on at the upcoming summit in Washington, D.C. To discuss this, we're joined by our next guest, Gary Tabach, a former Chief of Staff, NATO Military Liaison Mission in Moscow.
Good evening, sir. Delighted to have you on.
Great to be on TVP. Thank you.
So before we start our discussion, let's take a listen to what Jens Stoltenberg, NATO's Secretary General, had to say about this.
We will agree to work more closely with the Ukrainian armed forces, including at the new NATO-Ukraine Joint Analysis, Training and Education Center in Poland. We will also work together to build Ukraine's defense industry and deepen our cooperation on innovation. All the work we are doing together is making Ukraine stronger, more interoperable and better prepared than ever to join our alliance.
So during his time in office, and it has been a decade, but of course the war in Ukraine has been going on since 22. What I'm getting at is that Jens Stoltenberg has failed to convince the member countries to commit to a long-term aid for Ukraine. So why would this change now?
Well, I don't think it has changed. I think that, again, the word you used is committed. Committed and delivered are two different things. So they've been committing to help Ukraine, to provide Ukraine enclosed the skies with anti-aircraft and anti-missile defenses. None of that is happening. And we can see that every day the bombardments do continue. And, they're talking about Trump-proof. It's a Trump. Trump is not the president of the United States. And if you remember, it was Trump who said it was unfair that the other countries are not paying their share and depending on the United States to finance NATO and to fight in case if there is a war, while other countries, and he meant the Germany is building Nord Stream and is going to be making billions of dollars. And at that point, Stoltenberg thanked Trump for it, saying, listen, they start paying their dues. And so I guess they're trying to divert attention again to Trump. That seems to me that's kind of thing is like, well, let's blame Trump before he even becomes in the NATO. And as you remember, it was President Biden who, on the first day coming into the White House, said that the question about Ukraine joining NATO is off the table. So I think there is a great deal of TDS in Europe, Trump derangement syndrome, that goes on, that's nonstop. And after the debates, that's just increased a great deal. Now, again, they're all talking about Ukraine joining NATO, but nobody's talking about the mechanism. How do you foresee Ukraine joining NATO? There's a war going on in Ukraine. They're trying to, again, somehow to divert from the attention to saying, well, there's a corruption. Really? Well, I don't think Albania has any less corruption, and it had no problem joining NATO, and there's other countries that do that. So there's a lot of those things that it's just political rhetoric without any action. Just like we say, NATO stands for no action, talk only. And I was honored to serve as a NATO officer for 2 terms. So it's a problem. It's a problem that we're talking about, again, not the issues that's supposed to solve the issue. And again, before we're talking about NATO, how about becoming a NATO ally and a close ally of United States, such countries as Israel, as South Korea, as Japan, as Afghanistan used to be. And all it requires before you join the NATO is the signature of a president of the United States, and that country would become. But he's not doing it. It's much easier to threaten people with Trump and promising something that's not deliverable at this point.
All right, so according to your analysis and what you just told us here, maybe there is a path to give Ukraine further support, be it from NATO, from the United States, or from European countries by, for example, just making them a NATO ally. That might be a little bit more realistic than this relatively far-fetched goal of being a NATO member. So why isn't that on the table of discussion?
Well, because that depends not on the NATO, on the collective NATO. It depends only on one person, the President of the United States. And clearly, President of the United States has no intention to do that. That's what actually the President Trump used to talk about it. And maybe he'll raise that issue again. But of course, we got to see. So far there's such resistance to him, and I think there's a lot of rumors going on. Then what we want is we give up the area, we give up the ground that Russians invaded and occupied. Okay, we give it up to them, and then the rest of the Ukraine will become NATO, and that will be provide security for NATO, security guarantees. Which, in my opinion, again, that is my personal opinion. That is my view from Ukraine, and as an American and as a former NATO officer, it's a trick. I wouldn't go for it, because you're going to give up the land, you're going to give up the ground, you're going to sign an agreement with Putin, and then NATO is not going to take you in. Then again, one country will vote against that. That could be Hungary, that could be France, that could be Germany. In 2008, during the NATO summit in Bucharest, Germany and France voted against Ukraine, yet there was no war in Ukraine or Georgia, and both of those countries were turned down. So today there's a much more of a difficult situation than it was in 2008.
Right, so, and do you expect some changes to how NATO is being run after Mark Rutte takes over in October?
No, I don't think so, because it's not the president, it's not a prime minister, it's a secretary general, and it's exactly what it is. It's a secretary, except it's a secretary general. Just like in the Soviet Union, Brezhnev and Andropov and the rest of them were secretary generals. So, but in the sense they were dictators. In the NATO, there is no dictatorship. All the countries have to vote. So they don't have as much power as people think they do. Look, Stoltenberg has been a great leader of NATO, but has he been able to accomplish anything in a sense? Anything? No, because there's always this one country or two countries or five countries that are gonna, pull the blanket over themselves or do something that is not in the common interest, in the communal interest, in the collective interest of NATO. NATO became too big and too bureaucratic and too political. It's not NATO that was during the Soviet era to counter the Warsaw Pact.
All right, you mentioned the reluctance of the United States to bring Ukraine on board as a NATO ally, but also, like you mentioned, this is not a dictatorship. It is an organization that does require the input of all the countries. What about the European nation? What about the European allies? Have they not tried to pressure the United States to bring Ukraine in as a NATO ally so that they can defend them more properly? Or is there actually a secret reluctance there?
Well, again, it depends which nations you're talking about. If you're talking about Poland, they definitely did more than their share, and that Poland has paid into NATO more than their share. If you were talking about Germany or France or Italy, they haven't. So and Spain, those major countries with major economies, has not paid their share, and they did vote against Ukraine and Georgia to join in 2008. So has there been much pressure or influence on the United States? I don't think so far that it has been the issue. Again, I know I've been beating that dead horse for a long time, but again, in the United States, at this point, we have an extremely weak government, an extremely weak leader that cannot lead a supernation like United States. So there is no unity in NATO, there is no unity in the world, and Ukraine suffers and bleeds because of that, because of such situation that they ended up in. But I think there should be pressure on the United States and on the United States leadership to do something about the Ukrainian situation before it blows up into World War III.
Sir, so we have this summit in D.C. coming up in just 5 days. What do you think will be established, if anything, during that summit?
You know what? I can't predict the future, but I can study the past. And in the past, all those summits have not resolved anything. All those summits, all those roundtables, except that five-star hotels are filled with these people, and first and business class airlines are to the maximum to fly to Washington, stuff like this. So in the past, they have not done anything. To have an expectation that they're going to accomplish anything this time, I don't have any. And I don't encourage Ukrainians to believe that something will change. Ukrainians need to be ready and expect, like Israelis do, that nobody's going to come to your rescue. You know, everybody tries and everybody helps a little bit here and there, but nobody's going to come to rescue you except you, and your diplomacy needs to work. And I guess the only ones I will exclude are the Poles. The Poles did come to the rescue.
However, there is an expectation that perhaps the Deputy Secretary General will be announced in D.C. during that summit in 5 days. Who do you think, I mean, from which country do you think this person could come from?
I don't know. Again, I have a piece of my heart in Poland. I've served with the Polish troops. I've served with the Polish commanders. I think that at least the deputy, actually I thought the Secretary General should be, but since it's not going to happen, since the Secretary General is going to be from the old Europe, as we say, perhaps the deputy will be from the new Europe, and hopefully it will be Polish one. That would be my wish, but I don't know. I have no say in it. For some reason, the NATO leadership does not ask for my advice. I don't know why. What's wrong with it?
Well, there's also a possibility of announcement of 100 billion euro in terms of support for Ukraine. Wouldn't you say that is something substantial?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's absolutely essential. But again, that's an announcement. That's commitment. They commit, but they don't deliver. And we've been committing billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. All those 51 countries that have been committing their resources to Ukraine, but if you come to Ukraine, they're not getting much. They're getting very, very, very little, really nothing. They have to depend on themselves. So yeah, they commit those 100 billion, 100 million, 100 trillion, but when are they going to deliver it? And again, it's not the money, it's the weapons. They need the weapon systems. Because the money get to be allocated for different things, building roads, education, gender education and things like that, making a film. There are a lot of different things that are being thrown into those packages, and very little just expendable ammunition. That's about it.
All right, thank you, sir, so much for your input and insight and help us paint a bigger picture of the situation. Gary Tabach, former Chief of Staff, NATO Military Liaison. Thank you so much for being with us here.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.